Imagine asking a genius to solve a puzzle and halfway through they just give up. Not because it's too hard, but because they're pretending to be smart. That's what Apple just exposed in the biggest AI reality check we've seen in years. Most people think AI is getting smarter by the day. They see it writing essays, solving math problems, even holding conversations, and it all seems so human, especially when it starts showing its work, laying out step-by-step reasoning like a genius tutor. But what if that's all an act? What if the steps that look like deep thought are just recycled patterns from its training data, stitched together to fool us into believing it's actually thinking? That's exactly what Apple set out to investigate. And the results? They weren't just surprising, they were disturbing. This video is about something you probably assumed AI already had figured out: thinking. Not just answering, but actually reasoning. Now, most people believe that when AI shows you a long train of thought, it's a sign of deep intelligence, that it's breaking down the problem piece by piece, just like a human would. That belief is everywhere, from YouTube demos to academic papers. But here's the twist. Apple's researchers just dropped a study that blows this idea apart. It shows that these so-called reasoning models might be faking the process altogether. They aren't thinking, they're performing. In this video, we'll break down how Apple ran some of the most brutally honest tests ever on AI. You'll see how models like Claude, DeepSeek, and even OpenAI's best collapsed under pressure, and what this says about the future of artificial intelligence. And this isn't just speculation. Apple backed their claims with real data. 64,000 token-long experiments, puzzle challenges, and test results that expose the limits of today's smartest systems. If you're even a little curious about how AI actually works, and whether it's all just smoke and mirrors, stick around. And if this kind of truth-telling about tech interests you, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. This is just the beginning. The illusion of reasoning. Most artificial intelligence models today are built to give you answers. But the newer ones like Claude or DeepSeek try to go a step further. They're designed to reason out loud, showing every step of their thinking. On the surface, that sounds brilliant. It gives people more trust in the answer, and it looks a lot more like human intelligence. But there's a catch. Until now, nobody really asked, do those reasoning steps actually make sense? We've been assuming that if the final answer is correct, the steps that led there must be too. But Apple's research team wasn't convinced. They wanted to know, are these AI models actually thinking? Or are they just imitating the process? Like an actor playing the role of a genius? To answer that question, Apple didn't just test the final answers. They went deeper, tracking every single step of the model's thought process, move by move. Apple's Puzzle Gauntlet. To truly measure reasoning, Apple designed a series of controlled, logic-based challenges. If you've ever studied computer science, you'll recognize them. Tower of Hanoi, checkers jumping, river crossing, and something called Blocks World. These puzzles are brilliant tools for testing logic because their complexity can be increased step by step without changing the rules. Add more discs in Hanoi, more pieces in checkers, or more agents in river crossing, and the puzzle becomes harder, but the logic stays the same. This let Apple turn the difficulty dial slowly, measuring how the AI adapted. Each puzzle was custom built, meaning there was zero chance the answers were already in the model's training data. That's crucial. It means the models had to actually reason, not just recognize a pattern they'd seen before. And Apple didn't hold back. They gave each AI model up to 64,000 tokens of space to reason through the challenge. That's a massive window, enough to test not just memory, but logic, persistence, and consistency. They tested pairs of models that were identical in every way. Same architecture, same weights, same size, except one was told to think step by step, and the other wasn't. Then they pushed them to their limits. Cracking under pressure. At first, things went as expected. On simple puzzles, like Hanoi with 3 or 4 discs, the non-reasoning models actually did better. They gave faster, correct answers without wasting time explaining themselves. Efficiency won. But as the puzzles got harder, the story changed. Around the mid-level challenges, say Hanoi with 7 discs, the reasoning models pulled ahead. Their slow, methodical approach started to beat out the fast guessers. Then came the breaking point. Once the puzzles reached real complexity, like Hanoi with 10 disks, or checkers requiring more than 11 jumps, all the models collapsed. Not just the fast ones, not just the slow ones. Every version failed. Claude 3.7. Thinking started strong. It handled puzzles up to 8 disks well. But when it tried to go further to 10 or more disks, it failed completely. DeepSeek R1 couldn't even get that far. Apple pushed Hanoi puzzles all the way up to 20 disks. That requires over 1 million steps to solve. Not a single model made it through. And this wasn't just about Hanoi. In every puzzle, Checkers, Blocks World, River Crossing, the same thing happened. The models failed. But that wasn't the weirdest part. The drop in effort. Here's where things get truly bizarre. You'd think that as the puzzles got harder, the AI would try harder. Use more of those 64,000 tokens to think through the problem. That's what a human would do, right? But Apple discovered the opposite. In moderate puzzles, models like DeepSeek R1 would use up to 15,000 tokens just thinking. But once the puzzle crossed a certain difficulty line, their effort dropped. Down to just 3,000 tokens, sometimes even less. That's like running out of gas right before the finish line, but choosing to stop running anyway. Apple called this a counterintuitive scaling limit. Even though the models had space to think, they chose not to. And as the effort dropped, so did accuracy. In a fascinating part of the study, the researchers gave the models the full solution to the Hanoi puzzle. Step-by-step instructions. All the models had to do was follow the directions. They couldn't do it. Even when the thinking part was removed, the models still broke down at the same points. Claude Thinking could do around 100 steps of the 1,023 needed for a 10-disc puzzle. After that, it failed. River Crossing, just 5 moves. That's it. This wasn't a memory issue, this was a breakdown in reasoning. And if you're finding this eye-opening, you're not alone. Drop a like if this kind of breakdown surprises you, and subscribe if you're curious what else AI might be hiding beneath the surface. We've got more ahead. Divided experts. The moment Apple's research hit the internet, the AI world lit up. Some called the results devastating. Others said they missed the point. Gary Marcus, a well-known AI critic and cognitive scientist, didn't hold back.
If you can't use a billion-dollar AI system to solve a problem that Herb Simon, one of the actual godfathers of AI, current hype aside, solved with AI in 1957, and that first semester AI students solve routinely, the chances that models like Claude or O3 are going to reach AGI seem truly remote. Gary Marcus, cognitive scientist and author of Rebooting AI, reflecting on Apple's reasoning paper on The Economic Times.
He wasn't just throwing shade, he was pointing out how far modern AI still has to go. But others had a different take. Kevin Bryan from the University of Toronto suggested that this wasn't a sign of weakness, but of priorities.
These systems are trained to use shortcuts under tight computational budgets. Internal benchmarks show models perform better when allowed more tokens, but production systems restrict this on purpose to avoid inefficiency, meaning the Apple findings might be discovering limits by design, not nature. Kevin A. Bryan explained on X about Apple's reasoning paper.
In other words, maybe the models could do better if they were trained differently. But they're designed to avoid wasting resources on overly hard problems. Software engineer Sean Godke added another layer. He argued that when models like DeepSeek realize the puzzle is too long, 1,000 moves, they just stop trying. Not because they can't, but because they've learned to conserve effort. And Simon Willis raised a different point.
The paper is not news. We already knew these models generalize poorly. True. But then why do we think these models are the royal road to AGI? Simon Willison, reflecting on Apple's study and broader AI expectations on simonwillison.net.
Even Apple's own team admitted it. Puzzles like these test only a narrow slice of what reasoning really means. But they're still useful, for one critical reason. Every move is verifiable. When a model fails, know exactly where and how. And fail they did. Across the board. Leaked data and broken illusions. To test how well these AI models could handle brand new problems, Apple didn't stop with logic puzzles. They ran math benchmark tests, comparing reasoning-enabled models to their standard versions. On older test sets like Math 500, both types of models performed about the same when allowed multiple guesses. That might not sound suspicious until you look at newer tests, On the AIM I-24 and AIM E-25 sets, something weird happened. The reasoning models started pulling ahead. What's strange is that human test takers actually performed better on AIM E-25 than on 24. But AI models, they got worse. That raises a red flag. Why would models perform worse on a slightly easier test? The most likely explanation: data leakage. Older test sets had likely been included in the training data of many large language models. When those problems reappeared in benchmarks, the models weren't solving them. They were remembering them. But the newer AIME tests hadn't leaked. So when real, unseen problems came up, the models floundered. It's like giving a student a test they secretly had the answers to, and then watching them crumble when they finally get a real exam. The truth? These models weren't reasoning at all. They were recalling. This distinction between reasoning and remembering is becoming harder to ignore, and the gap is starting to show. Apple's AI show vs. reality. Just as Apple's research was making waves, the company held its big annual Worldwide Developers Conference. You'd think they'd lead with this bold new AI research, that they'd roll out next-gen intelligence, or at least brag about Claude's capabilities. Instead, the focus was design. Apple unveiled what it calls the biggest visual redesign since iOS 7. Translucent buttons, fluid animations, and a liquid glass aesthetic across iPhone, Mac, and even the Vision Pro headset. The demos looked stunning. Animations running at 120 frames per second. Widgets that glide. Interfaces that shimmer. But behind the polish, something was missing. Where was the groundbreaking AI? Where was the powerful new Siri? The features they'd been teasing for months, like scanning your emails and setting appointments automatically, were nowhere to be found. Yes, they showcased a few AI features, a real-time phone call translator that works offline, a button to summarize screenshots using ChatGPT, image generation inside the Photos app. Nice upgrades, but not revolutionary. Wall Street noticed. Apple's stock dropped by 1.2% after the event. One analyst summed it up best: the AI features were nothing new. Most of them already exist in apps outside of Apple's ecosystem. In other words, while Apple's researchers were questioning the very nature of machine reasoning, their product team was busy polishing the edges, and the contrast couldn't be more striking. So, is AI just faking it? At the heart of this entire study is one chilling question. If AI can't reason, is it all just a high-tech illusion? The evidence is piling up. These models work impressively well until they hit a task that requires deep, multi-step reasoning. Then they either fail completely or stop trying altogether. Apple's researchers didn't just speculate. They measured every move, every decision, every shift in effort. And the patterns they found were damning. In one case, Claude 3.7 thinking could perform over 100 correct steps in the 10-disc Hanoi puzzle before slipping. But in the river crossing task, it broke down after just 5 moves, even though the whole puzzle only required 11 steps. Why such a massive difference? The study suggests it comes down to examples. There are tons of Hanoi solutions online, especially for 10-disc versions. But river crossing puzzles with more than 2 pairs of people? Rare. That means Claude had less data to mimic, less to recognize. And without that familiarity, the illusion of reasoning broke down. Because what we're seeing isn't intelligence. It's not logic, it's pattern recall, and pattern recall only takes you so far. The cracks are showing. Most people still believe artificial intelligence is racing toward human-level thinking. That chain of thought answers mean the machine is truly understanding. But Apple's research flips that narrative on its head. What they found wasn't thinking, it was performing. Not logic, but imitation. The smartest models in the world, Claude, DeepSeek, even OpenAI's top-tier systems, can give the illusion of reasoning. But push them hard enough and that illusion shatters. So, where does that leave us? Some researchers believe the solution is more training data, more tokens, bigger models. Maybe that's true. But others argue we've hit a wall, that our current approach predicting the next word simply isn't enough to build machines that think. We need something new, a fundamentally different architecture. One that doesn't just pretend to reason, but actually can. Because right now, AI isn't thinking, it's faking it. If this shook your view of AI, drop a like and hit subscribe. There's a lot more behind the curtain of artificial intelligence, and we're just getting started. So, take a deep breath, check out the links in the description, and I catch you in the next one.